For this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak in reference to Christ and the church. These are words of St. Paul. What is St. Paul telling us? But that Jesus elevated marriage to a sacrament, meaning if both parties are baptized, the marriage participates in Jesus' love for his church. Jesus is the bridegroom, the church is the bride. In 2002, Pope John Paul II beatified, meaning one step away from canonization, for the first time in history, a husband and wife who were non-martyrs at the same time. In other words, a couple was recognized as one step away from becoming official saints. The names are Luigi and Maria Quattrocchi. They were married in 1905. The marriage lasted 46 years when Luigi died. They had 4 children, 3 of whom became priests or religious. They were real people dealing with real issues in this world. They were holy people. They were faithful to the Lord. They were faithful to each other. They were dedicated spouses and parents. In doing this, Pope John Paul was sending a message to all people, especially those who have embraced matrimony. In 2015, the Holy Father canonized another couple, Louis and Zélie Martin. The two of them had thought originally that they had religious vocations. In other words, to join the monastery and the convent. But they fell in love and got married, but had planned to have a white marriage. A white marriage means non-consummated, such as Mary and Joseph had. But their spiritual director talked them out of this and told them to start having a family and so forth. So they had 9 children, 5 of whom survived infancy. All 5 girls grew up and joined the convent. 4 of them went to the same convent. And one of the girls, most of us know of very well, Saint Therese, the Little Flower. The point is that the Lord does wonderful work today through what he has designed, the union of husband and wife. We live in a culture that unfortunately has decided that marriage is not important, or even worse, that it's anything we want it to be. So several years ago, I received a letter from somebody in the parish, a couple. They said they were leaving the parish. And here's the reason. Because I do not support same-sex marriage. I'm a Catholic priest. I'm not a politician. Why would I support an aberration? It's not up to us to redesign marriage. And look at the example of money, just for an example. What's the problem with counterfeits? Counterfeit marriage or counterfeit money? Counterfeit money drives down the value of real money. That's why it's against the law. Counterfeit marriage, the same thing. Marriage fidelity no longer in our nation enjoys the support of the law. And I'm only reporting this because many people don't realize it. Starting in 1969 in California, and then it spread to every other state, the so-called no-fault divorce. Here's the issue. I've worked with people whose spouses were bound and determined to get divorced from them. They didn't want it, but there was nothing they could do under the law to stop it. We have now almost a 50% divorce rate. Now, mind you, nobody can live with an abuser. That isn't the point. Sometimes there has to be a separation. Ideally temporary, but sometimes it doesn't work that way. But the problem is we have an open door for people to get out. It doesn't help people, it doesn't encourage them to work out their marriage. And again, our civil law system, unfortunately, has collapsed on this point. Another big issue today, which hurts marriage very much, and you'll never hear about it unless you do reading of a certain type, is the fact that, again, go back to the early 1960s, Griswold versus Connecticut, the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court basically said that states cannot restrict the distribution and sales of contraceptives. So here's what's happened. It's become a contraceptive culture. Contraception brings lust into a marriage, and it becomes self-serving rather than people being open to children. Now, if there's a legitimate reason to postpone a pregnancy, and sometimes there's something called natural family planning, which is not morally problematic, it's not medically problematic, and it's not maritally problematic. Another thing about hormonal contraception, and this has been established, that it's a carcinogen. So a woman who's on hormonal contraception for 10 years has a 40% greater risk of breast cancer. Who wants breast cancer? Another thing is, it's very important that people prepare for marriage properly. For most people, the most important decision that they will ever make is the choice of a marriage partner. How do we decide? What's the most important attribute of a marriage partner or a prospective marriage partner? Not good looks, not money, not sex appeal, not any of these things. The person fundamentally must be a person of good character, a virtuous person, ideally a holy person. Now, I'm not suggesting that there are any perfect people. There are only actually two of them, Mary and Jesus. So it's not a matter of finding somebody who's perfect, because we'll never find him. But we have to be very on guard against giving in to somebody who is, let's say, compromised morally or spiritually. I remember a woman whom I know very well. She had a very short-lived marriage. Here's why. Her parents told her, "Don't marry this fellow. He had definite baggage." She was the kind of person who was very strong-willed. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. She married him because she said that she thought she could straighten him out. You can't straighten anybody out. So why bother trying to straighten somebody out? Alcoholism, pornography, these are big red flags. Be careful. Find somebody who shares the faith, ideally, practices the faith, loves the Lord. Work together. And again, practice perfect continence. A study from Rutgers University, and you can look up on the internet, 1999, and then later the University of Virginia. When people cohabit before marriage, their chances of divorce increase rather significantly. Chastity is very important. It's not just a rule, but it's really a protection. So we must be protected. We must pray, never take anything for granted. It's important for people to work on their marriages. If anybody buys property, for example, let's say a building, and on land, the lawn has to be mowed, the building has to be painted and maintained. Why? Because otherwise things will deteriorate. Now, a marriage is more important than a building. The moral of the story is never take marriage for granted. Greg and Lisa Popcak, P-O-P-C-A-K, you can get in any of their books, I recommend them, talk about one of the things that hurts marriages is anger. People have to do something with their anger. And the point is that they have to be willing to forgive and to forgive. Talk with each other respectfully. This idea of, I told my spouse that I hated him, that's unbelievable. Why would anybody say that to anybody, especially one spouse? One spouse should be on a pedestal. True. If people had respect for their spouses, things would be completely different. We have to have compassion on people. Everybody, every person is imperfect. We have to be willing to be merciful to people with their faults and not become overly critical, judgmental. I mean, that can hurt a marriage. And we work together. I know a couple, they're both practicing Catholics, but here's the problem. The man wants nothing to do with working on the marriage. He thinks it's a ridiculous idea. Why would anybody think that? Why settle for mediocrity? There are many ways to work on a marriage, through prayer, through study. There's marriage encounter. Marriage encounter is a good thing. It helps people get better marriages. And if people are having real difficulties and problems in the marriage, there are ways to deal with those things, like retrouvaille. Retrouvaille means marriage rediscovery. It's run by couples who themselves have recovered from terrible situations in their marriages. So the point is that there is help available. Thing is, get help, maintain what we have, let it grow.